What was Operation Century? The investigation into the Rettendon murders soon took a darker turn when Essex police launched a sting operation known as Operation Century, which was masterminded by Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley and assisted by the Royal Ulster Constabulary Special Branch. The purpose of the operation was to bring pressure to those people who were suspected of having knowledge about the triple murder. The operation was timed to coincide with the February 1996 bombing of Canary Wharf, which was a renewal of the Irish Republican bombing campaign in mainland Britain. While the Rettendon murders had no connection to the IRA or the bombing, Essex and RUC Special Branch used it as a pretext for issuing threats and intimidation as part of their undercover operation. Essex suspects and their families were subjected to harassing telephone calls. These were made by Belfast Special Branch officers from Ireland, who would pose as Republican drug runners claiming they had funded the criminal activities of the Rettendon murder victims and were still demanding payment from their families. This deception failed, and the suspects refused to meet with undercover officers. The phone calls contained extremely foul-mouthed and threatening language and could have been interpreted by the suspects as death threats. One of the victims subjected to this was the live-in partner of one of the murdered men, with whom she had a young child. Donna Jaggers, the girlfriend of Craig Rolfe, would later admit that she had no idea these terror tactics were not being utilized by Belfast-based Republicans, and so she sought assistance from Essex police, who informed her the calls were made from Belfast. She was also told that the terrorists had crossed into mainland Britain, and they were unable to track their movements. This had a profound effect on a woman who was already distraught and grieving. The methods used during Operation Century were illegal and counterproductive to the investigation. Who killed the Essex Boys? In May 1996, a break in the case was made when 3 men were arrested during a police and customs drugs operation. 52-year-old Michael Steele, 33-year-old Jack Hooms, and a third man were arrested and held on suspicion of importing drugs. During the investigation, the 3 men were linked to the Rettendon murders of Tate, Tucker, and Rolfe. Facing a murder charge, the third man, convicted fraudster Darren Nichols, began confessing to police his role in the murders. He claimed to have met Steele, Hooms, and Tate a few years earlier while serving a prison sentence for distributing counterfeit currency at Halsley Bay Prison in Suffolk. Upon his release, Nichols joined Steele's smuggling organization, making trips to Amsterdam. While there, he purchased hundreds of kilos of cannabis, which he then drove to the Belgian coast. From there, he would meet up with Steele's speedboat, and then the drugs were taken across the channel and deposited on the Essex. Michael Steele and Jack Hooms Steele was described as a sophisticated Essex drug smuggler, and in November 1995, he supplied a consignment of cannabis with a street value of around £350,000 to Tate, Tucker, and Rolfe. But the quality was so poor that Steele agreed to take back the cannabis and return a deposit of around £70,000. The money was paid, but Tate denied getting it and also failed to return 1/3 of the drugs. When he protested, Tate threatened to shoot Steele on his knees. Heard of the threats and decided he would move first. On the pretense of making amends, Steele offered Tate a share in a lucrative cocaine deal he was involved in with his friend Jack Hooms. 6 weeks before the murders, Steele contacted Nichols and asked him to get him a gun. He said Jack had a couple, but they didn't want to use those. And so Nichols said he asked a few people, but failed to come up with anything. Tate, Tucker, and Rolfe were invited to look at the farmer's field where the alleged drug plane would land. Nichols claimed that as Rolfe's Range Rover approached the locked gate at the bottom of Workhouse Lane, Steele jumped out to open it. At the same moment, Jack Hooms, known as Steele's right-hand man, leant in with a pump-action shotgun and began blasting the 3 men inside. Seconds later, Hooms was calling Nichols on his mobile and asked him to pick them up. Nick Steele. He said it was only when they climbed into the back of his car, spattered in blood, that he realized what had happened. In his testimony, Nichols claimed that during the journey home, Steele had said, "They won't fuck with us again." Nichols said he went on to say he felt like an angel of death because he felt he had done everyone a favor by getting rid of these 3 men. I think I knew all along that they were going to do it. After the murder, Nichols said he stopped smuggling in an attempt to distance himself from Steele and Holmes. However, fearing he was an accessory to the killings, Nichols said he had to continue selling drugs on Steele's behalf. He said when they realized he was becoming a weak link, they insisted he become more involved or face the consequences. Several says before their arrest, Nichols said both men had issued him with a particularly nasty threat. What was the outcome of the Rettendon murder trial? In late 1997, Michael Steele and Jack Holmes went on trial based on the testimony of Supergrass Darren Nichols. Charged with murder, Nichols said he knew the only way out was to tell the truth. He said, "When giving evidence at the trial, I couldn't look at them in the dock. I really felt like I was letting them down. I really liked Mick and I thought he liked me. But in fact, they were just using me. And now they hate me." The trial lasted 4.5 months, and the court proceedings were believed to have cost well over £1 million. The court heard that Essex detectives spent 30 hours questioning Nichols, but with the tape recorder turned off, while Holmes and Steele's lawyers claimed he had fabricated his story. Towards the end of the Rettendon murder trial, the court heard details of Operation Century. This was the code name for the sting operation conducted by Essex Police in conjunction with RUC Special Branch officers, and it was revealed to be bizarre and intimidatory for having bombarded the victims' families with death threat phone calls from Northern Ireland, claiming they were owed money by one of the Rettendon murder victims. It was considered by Detective Superintendent Dibley to be an appropriate tactic after something similar had been used against Colin Stagg during the Rachel Nicholl murder case, and although it had not been described as illegal by the trial judge, he had scathingly dismissed the prosecution because police had used such disgraceful tactics of the gross. At the Old Bailey on January 20th, 1998, the jury deliberated the evidence for 4.5 days before returning guilty verdicts for both men. The weight of evidence had been mobile phone records used to corroborate the informant's testimony, the reliability of which were raised afterwards. Michael Steele and Jack Holmes were convicted of the 3 murders and given triple life sentences. Darren Nichols was placed in the witness protection program with new identities for him and his family. Nichols that unwritten law that you know. Killing me now. If I'm dead, that won't get anybody off. What they might try to do is scare me into saying I was lying in court, so keeping my true identity secret is as important as ever. How has the Essex Boys Range Rover murders impacted criminal legislation in Britain today? In 2001, the Metropolitan Police commissioned an internal investigation into corruption codenamed Operation Tiberius. Completed by 2002, the official documents were leaked to the Independent newspaper in 2014. The operation was launched to investigation the evidence that certain organized criminals had infiltrated Scotland Yard through bribery. During the course of the inquiry, 42 serving and 19 former officers were investigated for alleged corruption, which resulted in few convictions. Criminal gangs were suspected of using their contacts inside Freemasonry to recruit corrupted officers, and the report concluded this was the most difficult aspects of organized crime corruption to proof against. The Metropolitan Police had long suffered endemic corruption, and because of the relatively small number of convictions, doubt has been expressed over the effectiveness of the investigation. With the revelations of Operation Tiberius, the Independent reported that some of Britain's most dangerous organized crime syndicates were able to infiltrate New Scotland Yard at will. A similar covert operation was set up in 1993, codenamed Operation Othona, which gathered intelligence on corruption within the Metropolitan Police Service. However, the work and findings of that operation were kept separate from other intelligence operations, and almost all records of the operation were destroyed in 2001 or 2003. The epidemic of Metropolitan Police corruption is believed to have existed for decades and would be brought to public attention with the complex criminal investigation into the grisly murder of private investigator Daniel Morgan. Morgan was attacked with an axe in the car park of the Golden Lion pub in South London on March 10, 1987. That case, as well as that of John Goldfinger Palmer, a criminal who was protected by corrupt officers, highlighted police collusion with criminal organizations. This, along with the involvement of Freemasonry within the police force, and the impunity of criminals in concealing their activities with the help of serving police officers, led to a tightening of the vetting process in police officer recruitment. Despite this, serving police and criminals continue to collude and commit crimes to their mutual benefit. Michael Steele and Jack Hooms have both professed their innocence of the crimes and have continued to unsuccessfully challenge their convictions. In 2018, the Criminal Case Review Commission, CCRC, began the fourth review of the case, this time looking at fresh evidence the two men claim supports their innocence. The first of these reviews was referred for appeal against their convictions in 2006, which was rejected. Earlier in the year, Hooms' maximum sentence was cut from 25 to just over 22 years, allowing him to apply for parole as early as 2020 due to his exceptional progress in prison. Michael Steele has claimed that police corruption was to blame for him being wrongly convicted of the notorious triple murders. The case has generated intense interest in both the media and public, while in the years since the triple murder, there have been various films and TV programs made about the case, which is often described as the Essex Boys Murders. In July 2000, by Miramax Home Video and 1995 murders of the 3 drug dealers at the Rettendon farm. A further 5 movies, all based to varying degrees on the Rettendon murders, have been released from 2007 to 2019. Rettendon Murders, New Murder Theory. In 2020, a team of private investigators from the firm TMI began investigating the Essex Boys murders of Pat Tate, Tony Tucker, and Craig Rolfe, and in the course of their research came across evidence they say now casts doubt on the original convictions of Michael Steele and Jack Hooms. They claimed the real killer had never been caught. Headed by David McKelvey, a former Met police detective, the team were featured in a 3-part Sky documentary that aired on April 11, 2023, titled The Essex Murders. The team created a timeline for the night of the murders and came to the conclusion the shootings happened at about midnight, rather than the 7 p.m. investigators originally suspected. However, McKelvey and his team dispute the perpetrators of the crime, believing that Mick Steele and Jack Hooms were not responsible. We would not be doing this if we had any doubts at all, he told Sky News. We're career detectives. We've put bad people in prison. We would not be trying to get anybody out of prison who we didn't believe was innocent. Jack Hooms and Michael Steele did not do this, McKelvey said, although he says the pair were heavily involved in drug smuggling, for which they should have been punished, but insists they did not kill Tucker, Tate, and Rolfe. But they did not carry out this murder, he added. And the important point here is, they didn't do it, someone else did, and that person or those people are still on the streets. Steele and Hooms were convicted on the testimony of Supergrass, Darren Nichols, who killed the 3 men over a drugs deal gone bad. Our start point was, did Darren Nichols tell the truth? Mr. McKelvey said. If he told the truth, then Michael Steele and Jack Hooms are guilty, and that's the end of it. But as we've delved into it all, a different story has emerged. Another former detective working the private investigation is Albert Patrick, who said, "You have got to be ultra careful when you're dealing with the evidence of another criminal against a criminal, as simple as that." The head of the original investigation, Ivan Dibley, admitted at the time that evidence left at the crime scene was scant, and came to the conclusion that Nichols was offering up testimony in an effort to save his own skin. However, Dibley formed the opinion that it was pretty clear that what he said was true. Dibley ultimately said there was no doubt in my mind that the right men were convicted. For McKelvey and his associates, who spoke to numerous criminals who feature prominently in the documentary, emerging evidence appears to paint a different story, one that seems to indicate the hit on the 3 men was carried out by a professional. Rettendon Murders. Professional assassin. One person interviewed for the documentary, known only as Witness A, maintains the Rettendon murders were connected to organized crime in East London and that the three men were murdered over the proceeds of an armed robbery in which Tony Tucker stole £455,000. Witness A was questioned by the original murder team shortly after the murders, but his account was taken no further. As a member of the criminal underworld, Witness A could possibly have an ulterior motive for coming forward. As a member of the criminal underworld, Witness A could possibly have an ulterior motive for coming forward, and as a self-confessed criminal, his testimony was discounted. McKelvey's team believe his story should be explored further and believe they are able to corroborate this account. Because of our backgrounds, our history, and our knowledge of organized crime, particularly in East London, we were able to get behind the customer promises. We were able to identify officers, criminals who knew him, and his account is compelling. In the course of their investigation, McKelvey says they spoke to another anonymous witness who came forward with important information and even admitted to organizing the hit. The target of the killings was allegedly Tony Tucker, who had stole the money from the armed robbery, while Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe were collateral damage. They were in the wrong place, wrong time, McKelvey added. When you put the whole thing together, you had serious and organized crime behind this. You had a professional assassin, a sophisticated assassination. The TMI investigators hope this fresh evidence will encourage more witnesses with relevant information to come forward, so the case can be reviewed by an independent police force. However, a spokesperson for the CCRC said in a statement, "A comprehensive review has concluded there is no real possibility that the Court of Appeal would overturn these murder convictions. The decision notifications were shared with the applicants and their legal representatives." A spokesperson for Essex Police commented that the murder team conducted an exhaustive investigation into the killings of Tony Tucker, Pat Tate, and Craig Rolfe, and the force welcomed the CCRC's decision and reiterated that this case has been